Albert Bandura's Social Cognitive Theory, presented by Group 3.
Coincidence? I think not. Albert Bandura's social cognitive theory takes chance encounters and fortuitous events seriously, even while recognizing that these meetings and events do not invariably alter one's life path. How we react to an unexpected meeting or event is usually more powerful than the event itself. B.F. Skinner belike, we learn from our own mistakes. And then enters Bandura, well, we can also learn from other people's mistakes. In social learning theory, Albert Bandura states behavior is learned from the environment through the process of observational learning. Unlike Skinner, Bandura believes that humans are active information and think about the relationship between their behavior and its consequences. Observational learning could not occur unless cognitive processes were at work. Here we have a quick overview on the several basic assumptions about social cognitive theory. First, the outstanding characteristic of humans is plasticity. This means that humans are flexible to learn a variety of behaviors in different situations. Second, people have the capacity to regulate their lives. This is through a triadic reciprocal causation model that includes behavioral, environment, and personal factors. Third, social cognitive theory takes an agentic perspective. That is, humans are capable to exercise control over the nature and quality of their lives. Fourth, people regulate their conduct through both external and internal factors. Fifth, when people find themselves in morally ambiguous situations, they typically attempt to regulate their behavior through moral agency, which includes redefining the behavior, disregarding or distorting the consequences of their behavior, dehumanizing or blaming the victims of their behavior, and displacing or diffusing responsibility for their actions.
Biography of Albert Bandura. Albert Bandura was a Canadian-American social cognitive psychologist born on December 4, 1925, and he died on July 27, 2021. He was the youngest of the 6 children and the only son in their family. Albert married Virginia Varnes in 1952 and they raised 2 daughters, Carol and Mary. Bandura's father was from Krakow, Poland, and his mother from Ukraine. His parents married and they both settled in Mandera, Alberta, where his father worked laying tracks for the Trans-Canada Railroad. Took his early education in one small school where he described there are only 2 teachers for high school. Due to this limited educational access or resources, he stated, the student had to take charge of their own education. He became fascinated by psychology after enrolling at the University of British Columbia, where he started out as a biological science major and then sparked his interest in psychology only by accident. He usually arrives early in the morning to pass time. He began to take filler classes during those hours, which brought him eventually to stumble in psychology. He stated, one morning I was wasting time in the library. Someone had forgotten to return a course catalog and I thumbed through it attempting to find a filler course to occupy the early time slot. I noticed a psychology course that would serve as an excellent filler. It spared my interest and I found my career. He finished high school in 1945, pursued a bachelor's degree at the University of British Columbia, and in 1949 graduated with the Bolokan Award in Psychology. He went to the University of Iowa, where he did his graduate work and received a master's degree in psychology in 1951. where he also received his doctorate in clinical psychology in 1952. He is the originator of social learning theory, which was later on renamed as social cognitive theory. He also introduced the concept of self-efficacy in his famous Bobo doll experiment. He taught as the professor emeritus at Stanford University and is considered as one of the greatest figures in psychology. In fact, on 2002, the Review of General Psychology ranked Bandura as the fourth most eminent psychologist of 20th century, following B.F. Skinner, Jean Piaget, and Sigmund Freud. In 1974, he was elected as the president of American Psychological Association, where he received his awards for his distinguished scientific contributions in 1980 and for his outstanding lifetime contributions to psychology in 2004. His works and theories had a tremendous impact on personality psychology, cognitive psychology, education, and psychotherapy.
We now move on to learning. Bandura's social cognitive theory assumes that humans are capable of learning multiple attitudes, skills, and behaviors, and that most of those learnings are a result of vicarious experiences or of observing others. Observational learning. In Bandura's social cognitive theory, it assumes that learning is possible even without direct experience through observation or by observing the behavior of other people. And this is where he differs from Skinner, who believed that learning is gained in response to direct interaction with the environment. Their beliefs also differ with regards to reinforcement, because Bandura believed that reinforcement, although helpful, is not necessary, since the observer can still learn from just observing the models being reinforced. Bandura believed that observational learning is more efficient than direct experience, because the learner is more cognitively involved. Modeling is the core of observational learning. It is not merely imitating the model or the person being observed, since it involves adding and subtracting the observed behavior and formulating a general idea as you move on from one observation to the next. The factors that determine if a person will learn from a model includes: first, the characteristics of the model; second, the characteristics of the observer; and third is the consequences of the behavior being observed. For the first factor, which is the characteristics of the model, it is important because people are more likely to model people who are of status and are competent and skilled than not. For the second factor, which is the characteristics of the observer, it also plays a role because the ones who are most likely to have a model are those who still have a lot to learn, like the children and those who are inexperienced. And lastly, the third factor, which is the consequences of the behavior being observed or modeled. If an observer sees the model receiving negative consequences, then the observer can assess whether the behavior was right or not, or if they would copy it or not. Processes of governing observational learning. There are 4 processes governing observational learning that were recognized by Bandura. The first one is attention. If we were to model or observe someone, attention is one of the most basic ingredients. The factors that would help regulate our attention would include the frequency of interaction. We are most likely to attend to people who we often interact with, because we have more opportunities to observe them. Second, we are more likely to observe models who we find attractive or interesting. And lastly is the nature of the behavior being modeled, which means whether we find the behavior valuable to us or not. The second process is called representation. In other sources, this process is called retention, and it is the ability to store information and be able to recall said information in the future. To learn new response patterns, those patterns must be symbolically represented in memory. Symbolic representation is the process of mentally representing an object or an experience with symbols, including linguistic symbols. The third process is called behavioral production. What comes after attending the model and retaining what we have observed is the production of the behavior. By assessing our learned behavior, we can improve and enhance our skills. The last process is called motivation. Motivation is important when it comes to observational learning because it is what drives the observer to perform the behavior. Observation may teach us how to perform the action, but it is motivation that will push us to actually perform it. Inactive learning. Bandura believed that complex human behavior can be learned when people make an effort to evaluate the consequences of their actions or behaviors. Each response we make has a consequence, which may or may not be a positive one, and these consequences will serve at least 3 functions. First is to let us know the effects of our actions. Second, in knowing the consequences of an action, we can anticipate what may happen in the future and act with those possible future outcomes in mind. And third, the consequences of an action serve to reinforce behavior, which is what Skinner and other reinforcement theorists also believed. Bandura believed that learning is more efficient when the learner is more cognitively involved in the learning process and is aware of what behaviors result in positive outcomes. To summarize, Bandura believed in 2 kinds of learning when it comes to acquiring new behaviors. The first one is observational learning, and its core element is modeling, which involves observing, retaining the observed behavior in memory, performing it, and having the motivation to do it. The other kind of learning is called inactive learning, and in this kind of learning, information or new patterns of behavior are acquired through direct experience by evaluating the consequences of their actions.
Albert Bandura explained his concept of human functioning through triadic reciprocal causation, or sometimes called as reciprocal determinism. This model has 3 components, which are the behavior, environment, and person. The person in the model includes an individual's cognitive processes and biological aspects like gender, position, or even physical attractiveness. According to Bandura, a person's thinking is not solely influenced by environmental aspects, but their behavior subsequently has effects on their environment. Because people possess cognitive capacities, they have the ability to restructure their environment. Cognition itself is determined, produced by both behavior and the surrounding environment. Bandura used the term reciprocal to indicate a triadic interaction of forces where each factors do not need to be of equal strength. The potency of the 3 varies according to the individual and the situation. There are instances when the behavior expends the greatest influence, then sometimes environment takes the lead. Although both environment and behavior can periodically be the dominant contributor to performance, cognition or the person is usually the strongest. An example of triadic reciprocal causation. From a father's point of view, his child asking for a second brownie is the situation's environmental event. If he handed his child a second brownie, the father could consider the consequences of rewarding or ignoring the child's conduct. He may visualize, if I give in to her please, she'll temporarily stop crying, but in future cases, she is more likely to persist until I give her what she wants. Thus, I will not grant her a second brownie. With that, the father has impacted both his environment or the child and his own behavior or the failure to provide a second brownie. The child's behavior correspondingly helps in shaping her father's cognition and behavior. If the child stops begging for another brownie, her father may then conceive a different gist of the situation. The father's shifted behavior instigated the change in environment. Therefore, the interaction between his environment, behavior, and cognition determines his subsequent behavior partially. Chance encounters and fortuitous events. Albert Bandura is the sole theorist to appraise the possible significance of these chance encounters and fortuitous events. Bandura describes a chance encounter as an unintended meeting of persons unfamiliar to each other. Fortuitous event, on the other hand, is an environmental experience that is unexpected and unintended. The everyday lives of people are affected by the persons they meet and random events that we could not merely predict. One's spouse, place of residence, and occupation are likely a result of a fortuitous meeting. Accurate predictions are almost impossible with fortuity. But then, by entering the triadic reciprocal model at point E, or the environment, and adding to the mutual interaction of the variables person, behavior, and environment, chance encounters could influence people. On this matter, chance and planned events influence people in the same manner. Once a chance encounter takes place, an individual behaves according to the new attitudes and interests of their new acquaintance. Although some instances of chance encounters persist, many unplanned events still have little to no influences on someone's behavior. Chance encounters and fortuitous events can be made possible, such as how a divorced man can increase the chances of remarrying through joining a dating application, immersing oneself in a singles club, or asking a friend to introduce him to a potential partner. If he finally gets along with someone, preparing himself to look more attractive and to be an interesting man increases his chances for a lasting relationship between them. Bandura quotes Louis Pasteur, "Chance favors only the prepared mind." Correspondingly, when a person preempts their possibility and takes action to reduce any negative impact they may have in the future, a prepared person is capable of escaping these unfavorable chance encounters.
Next is human agency. It is said that human agency is the essence of humanness. According to Albert Bandura, people are self-regulating, proactive, self-reflective, and self-organizing. Thus, human agency is the human capability to control and influence their actions to produce one's desired events. Human agency is an active process of investigating, controlling, and influencing the environment in order to achieve desired ends, rather than just being a thing. Core features of human agency. Bandura coined 4 features of human agency. These are intentionality, forethought, self-reactiveness, and self-reflectiveness. First, intentionality. Intentionality is defined as actions performed by a person to attain a certain goal. This aspect of human agency is predicated on the notion that a person would plan activities based on a desired future consequence. A person tries to ensure a future consequence by preparing an activity to accomplish that end without relying on prediction. However, when a person does not prepare for the possible consequences of his actions, the consequences can both be harmful and detrimental to person's self-efficacy beliefs. Overall, the concept of intention is founded on the idea of anticipating the effects and results of an action. If intention is used while making a choice, the results of these actions should potentially be easier to predict and manage. The phrase, "think before you act," can be used to describe intentionality. The second core feature is forethought. The process of applying thought to an action in order to accomplish desired goals or consequences is known as forethought. The act of forethought allows a person to visualize a desired goal and strive to behave in ways to achieve it. However, because nothing in life is certain or predictable, forethought may be used as a motivating tool to envision desirable consequences and seek to modify behaviors in order to reach them. Because our intended consequences energize our behavior, planning helps people to realize that they are in charge of their actions. The third core feature is called self-reactiveness. People do more than only plan and think about their future actions. They are also self-reactive when it comes to motivating and controlling their own actions. People not only make decisions, but they also track their progress towards fulfilling these choices. In connection, setting goals, according to Bandura, is insufficient for achieving intended outcomes. Goals should be clear, achievable, and reflect prospective successes that aren't too far away. The fourth core feature is called self-reflectiveness. We have the ability to reflect on our actions as agents of our own circumstances. By reflecting on his or her actions, a person may learn more about what drives and inspires them, as well as what behaviors led to the intended outcomes. Additionally, people also have the ability to think about the adequacy of their own thinking. People may also assess the impact of other people's behaviors upon themselves. Self-efficacy is people's most important self-reflective mechanism. Their belief that they are capable of doing activities and would achieve their desired outcomes. Bandura also presented 3 modes of human agency. These are self-efficacy, proxy agency, and collective efficacy. First, self-efficacy. What is self-efficacy? The term self-efficacy was first coined by Albert Bandura at Stanford University. In Bandura's terms, self-efficacy is the people's belief in their capability to exercise some measure of control over their own functioning and over environmental events. He also noted that self-efficacy beliefs are the foundation of human agency. To put it simply, self-efficacy is a person's beliefs in their ability to succeed in a particular situation. It is important to note that Bandura distinguished the difference between efficacy expectations and outcome expectations. He said that people's confidence in their capacity to accomplish specific activities is referred to as efficacy, whereas outcome expectations relates to one's forecast about the likely outcomes of an activity. Besides being different from outcome expectancies, self-efficacy must be distinguished from several other concepts. These are the following. The capacity to perform basic motor tasks like walking, reaching, and grasping is not included in efficacy. Second, efficacy does not mean that we can carry out specific behaviors without worry, tension, or fear. It simply refers to our assessment, whether correct or incorrect, of our ability to carry out the needed activities. Lastly, efficacy judgments are not the same as level of aspiration. Self-efficacy is also not the same as self-esteem or self-confidence in that it is not a universal notion. Self-efficacy can be high in one situation and low in another, under several competencies. In this sense, 4 potential predictive factors result from the combination of high and low effectiveness with responsive and non-responsive surroundings. Letter A. When there is high efficacy in a responsive environment, outcomes are presumably to be successful. B. When efficacy is low and the environment is responsive, there is a tendency that people may be depressed because other people are good at tasks they find difficult. C. When efficacy is high but the environment is unresponsive, people extend and intensify their efforts to change the environmental situations. And lastly, when low efficacy is paired with an unresponsive environment, people are most likely to feel indifferent, helplessness, and resignation. What contributes to self-efficacy? Personal efficacy can be maintained, acquired, enhanced, or may even be decreased through any or combination of the four of these. First, mastery experiences. Second, social modeling. Third, social persuasion. And lastly, physical and emotional states. First is mastery experiences. According to Bandura, mastery experiences are the most influential source of efficacy information because they provide the most authentic evidence of whether one can master whatever it takes to succeed. Success builds a robust beliefs in one's personal efficacy. Failures undermine it, especially if failures occur before a sense of efficacy is firmly established. The perceived outcomes of one's prior performance or mastery experience is the most significant source. And when we talk about mastery experiences, we're talking about the feelings one gets when they take on a new task and succeed at it. In general, successful performance raises efficacy expectations, whereas bad performance lowers them. Second is social modeling. The second important source of self-efficacy is through the vicarious experiences provided by social models. Bandura stated that seeing people similar to oneself succeed by sustained efforts raises observers' beliefs that they too possess the capabilities to master comparable activities to succeed. Observing other individuals successfully complete a task is known as vicarious experience. Third is social persuasion. Self-efficacy may also be gained or lost through social influence. Although the benefits of these sources are limited, persuasion from others can enhance or reduce self-efficacy under the right circumstances. The first need is that the persuader be believed. Critics from a trustworthy source have more impact than those from an untrustworthy source. Receiving positive verbal feedback while performing a difficult activity convinces a person that they have the necessary skills and talents to succeed. Verbal persuasion works on any age, but the earlier it is administered, the more likely it is likely to encourage building of self-efficacy. Lastly, physical and emotional states. People's physiological and emotional emotions are the last source of efficacy. When people are experiencing extreme fear, acute anxiety, or significant levels of stress, they are more likely to have lower efficacy expectations. Psychotherapists have known for a long time that lowering anxiety or increasing physical relaxation can help with performance.
Proxy agency. Bandura stated that no one has the time, energy, and resources to master every realm of everyday life. Successful functioning necessarily involves a blend of reliance on proxy agency in some areas of functioning. Thus, proxy agency involves having a semblance of control over the social conditions that impact day-to-day life. People in current American culture would be practically powerless if their lives were governed simply by their own achievements. The majority of individuals are unable to fix an air conditioner, a camera, or a car on their own. However, they can achieve their aim by obtaining help from others to fix these items through proxy agency. People try to change their lives by contacting a potentially influential person, they hire mentors to help them learn useful skills, they hire lawyers to solve legal problems, and so on. Proxy, on the other hand, has a disadvantage. People's feeling of personal and collective efficacy may be weakened if they rely too heavily on the competence and power of others. Example, late teenage or early adult age children may expect their parents to look after them, and people may come to expect their government to cater for their basic needs. Collective efficacy. Collective efficacy is the third mode of human agency. It is defined as the people's belief that their combined efforts will result in group success. In fact, Bandura proposed two techniques to measure collective efficacy. First is to integrate individual members' assessments of their personal capacities to engage in group beneficial actions. Second is to assess each individual's belief in the group's capacity to achieve the intended result. Collective efficacies derive from the personal efficacy of many individuals working together, rather than from a collective mind. The collective efficacy of a group, on the other hand, is determined by their conviction that they can operate together in a coordinated and interactive manner. People's self-efficacy may be high, while group efficacy is low. Bandura then listed several factors that can undermine collective efficacy. First, events in one area of the world might have an impact on individuals in other nations, leaving them feeling helpless. Second, people's perception of collective efficacy may be lowered as a result of current technology that they don't comprehend or feel they can control. Next, the complicated social machinery with layers of bureaucracy that hinder social change. Fourth, the tremendous scope and magnitudes of human issues.
What is self-regulation? Self-regulation means controlling one's behavior, emotions, and thoughts in order to achieve your long-term goals. In other words, self-regulation is your ability to think before acting instead of responding reactively. So what does this mean? For example, your boss at work or your team leader talks to you about your low and negative performance at work. Your first instinct would be to defend yourself, reject the comments, and give your reasons. But in reality, your TL's negative feedback might be true, and you really need to improve whatever you are working on, may it be your customer service or your product that you are trying to sell has negative reviews online. If you respond reactively, then you will think that the product that you are promoting is bad and focus on other products. But if you can control your emotions, then you will dig in and try to understand why the selling didn't work. Maybe it's because of the way you talk to your customers or the mood you establish in communicating with them. Our emotional state has a huge influence on our decision-making process and what actions we decide to take. That's why it is important to master these skills so that you don't make snap decisions that you will regret later. External factors in self-regulation. Environmental factors interacting with the personal influences shape individual standards for evaluation. We learn from parents and teachers the value of honest and friendly behavior. By direct experience, we learn to place more value on being warm and dry than being cold and wet. And through observing others, we build the standards for self-performance. Another is self-regulation is influenced by providing the means for reinforcement. Environmental support in the form of monetary retainer or praise and encouragement from others may also be necessary. The incentives to complete a lengthy project usually come from the environment and often take the form of small rewards contingent upon the completion of sub-goals. Self-reward like taking a break after accomplishing one task of the project or buying yourself your favorite snack after a long day of work count as incentives. However, self-reward for inadequate performance is likely to result in environmental sanctions like criticisms of your performance at work, withdrawing of financial support, or you may become self-critical and withhold rewards from yourselves. Internal factors in self-regulation. External factors interact with internal or personal factors in self-regulation. However, Bandura recognizes three internal requirements. First is self-observation. We must be able to monitor our own performance even though the attention we give to it need to be complete or even accurate. We must be able to understand ourselves more than other people do. We attend selectively to some aspects of our behavior and ignore others altogether. In accomplishing tasks, we pay attention to the quality, quantity, speed, or originality of our work. Observing our own performance is a first step in self-regulation. The second is judgmental process. Self-observation alone is not sufficient in regulating behavior. We must also evaluate our performance. Judgmental process helps us regulate our behavior through the process of cognition mediation. We are capable of judging the worth of our actions on the basis of goals we have set for ourselves. Personal standards allow us to evaluate our performances without comparing them to conduct of others. Usually, we evaluate our performances by comparing them to a standard of reference. We use our own previous levels of accomplishment as a reference for evaluating present performances. For example, has my math skills worsened over the summer? Before, I would get a perfect score over Hannah, who usually gets 5 over 10. Now, I can barely pass my test while Hannah has it higher. We may judge our performance by comparing it to that of a single individual or to a standard norm. The judgmental process is also dependent on the overall value we place on the activity, the confidence that our success is due to our efforts, and the belief that we are responsible for our own failures and performances. Then we will work more readily towards self-regulation. If we place minor value in cleaning our windows or watering the plants, then we will spend less time or little effort in trying to improve these abilities. If we believe that our success is due to our own efforts, we will take pride in our accomplishments and tend to work harder to attain our goals. If we believe that we are responsible for our own failures or inadequate performance, we will work more readily towards self-regulation. Self-reaction. Self-reaction is the way we respond positively or negatively to the behaviors that measure up to our own personal standards. People create incentives for their own action through self-reinforcement or self-punishment. When you stay up all night and get high scores, you reward yourself by buying your favorite milk tea. But when you skim and scan before an exam and get low scores, you punish yourself by not watching today's episode of your favorite movie series and sleep early. When people successfully meet their standards, they tend to self-produce rewards as pride and satisfaction. On the other hand, when it is not met, it follows a self-dissatisfaction or self-criticism. Self-regulation through moral agency. Through moral standards of conduct, an individual is capable of administering their action. Bandura sees these two aspects as a component of moral agency. First is preemptively helping people, and two, doing no harm to them. Until we act on our self-regulative mechanisms, it would not have any effect on others. We have no conscience or superego that always governs our behavior towards morality. Bandura asserts that when moral principles are executed, moral behaviors are anticipated. Based on Bandura's selective activation, self-operating influences only operate when activated. If asked why someone with moral uprightness behaves differently and without compassion to others, Bandura would respond with, People do not ordinarily engage in reprehensible conduct until they have justified to themselves the morality of their actions. Bandura's concept of disengagement of internal control insists that people have tendencies of separating themselves from the outcome of their behavior through justifying the morality of their actions. Disengagement mechanisms allow people to partake in inhumane behaviors while holding on to their moral beliefs. Selective activation and disengagement of internal control permits a person to behave differently in different situations. Likewise, with individuals of similar moral standards to behave contrastingly. Redefine the behavior. We can now refer at the upper left box of the picture. With the redefinition of behavior, people vindicate their deplorable behavior by means of cognitive restructuring that permits them to minimize or escape accountability. These three techniques allow them to relieve themselves of liability for their actions. First is moral justification, where a reprehensible conduct is made to seem defensible. Bandura cited the example of Alvin York, who was a World War I hero. York believed that killing was morally wrong. However, after his battalion commander said that certain conditions can be considered when killing enemy soldiers, and that killing must be done for defensive purposes, he became convinced afterwards. York was able to kill and capture more than 100 German soldiers. As a result, he became one of the greatest war heroes in American history. Second is through making advantageous or palliative comparisons between the behavior or even greater cruelties committed by other parties. An example is a student who vandalizes school properties then uses the excuse that others broke even more windows. And the final method is reducing responsibilities through redefining wrongful behavior is by using euphemistic labels. Example includes a politician who has pledged to the citizens not to raise taxes speak of revenue enhancement rather than taxes, and some Nazi leaders regarded the murder of Jews and purification of Europe. Disregard or distort the consequences of behavior. We can now refer at the upper center box of the image. The second method of avoiding responsibility is the distortion or disregarding the relationship between the behavior and its consequences. Bandura identified three techniques of this method. First is an individual can minimize the consequences of their behavior. An example is a driver who hit a girl crossing the pedestrian. As the injured person lies on the pavement, bleeding and unconscious, the driver says, "It doesn't seem bad. She's going to be fine." Second is people can disregard or ignore the consequences of their behavior, as when they do not see personally the possible effects of their actions. Example includes a time of war where the leader of a nation hardly checks the casualties and damages of their state resulting from their decisions. And lastly, people can distort or misconstruct the consequences of their actions, such as when a parent uses disciplining as an excuse for beating a child until bruises appear. Dehumanized or blame the victims. We can now refer to the upper right box in the figure. Next, by either dehumanizing victims or attributing blame to them, people can escape accountability for their actions. In time of war, they do not feel guilty for killing any enemy soldiers because they perceive them as subhuman. In US history, people of different races them and street people have become dehumanized victims. The civilians have endured too much acts of violence, deprivation, and mistreatment against this barbaric group, but they continued to avoid responsibility for their own behavior. When victims are not dehumanized, they are sometimes blamed for the perpetrator's bearing. An example is a rapist throwing his victim the blame for his crime for wearing a provocative dress. Displace or diffuse responsibility. In this part, we will now refer to the lower box in the figure. The final method is the displacing or diffusing of responsibility. The concept of displacement is referred as the placing of liability on an outside force, wherein an individual can lessen the consequences of their actions in turn. Examples include a college student who blames his professor for his failing grades, and a guy who claims that his old automobile is the reason why he's stuck in the flirting stage and cannot get a girlfriend. Additionally, to diffuse responsibility is to allow none to be responsible of an action, such as how a civil servant makes comments like, "That's the way things are done around here," as justification for her behavior throughout the entire bureaucracy.
Bandura's social cognitive theory explains psychological functioning in terms of dyadic reciprocal causation, and dysfunctional behavior is no exception. The term dysfunctional refers to abnormal or impaired functioning on the part of an individual in any type of relationship or among family members. Dysfunctional behaviors such as depression, phobias, and aggression are acquired through the reciprocal interaction of environment, personal factors, and behavior. When people set their goals too high and fails, it will frequently lead to depression. Depressed people mostly undervalue their own accomplishments. Depression results in chronic misery, feeling of worthlessness, and lack of purposefulness. According to Bandura, dysfunctional depression can occur in any three self-regulatory self-functions. 1. Self-observation, where people can misjudge their own performance or tend to exaggerate their past mistakes and minimize their prior accomplishments. Second, judgmental processes, where they are likely to make faulty judgments. They set their standards unrealistically high so that any personal accomplishment will be judged as a failure. 3. The self-reactions of depressed individuals, where they not only judge themselves harshly, but they are also inclined to treat themselves badly for their shortcomings. Phobias are fears that are strong and pervasive enough to have severe debilitating effects on one's daily life. According to Bandura, phobias and fears are learned by direct contact, inappropriate generalization, and observational experiences. Because the phobic person just avoids the dangerous object, phobias are difficult to overcome. The phobia will last indefinitely unless the object is encountered. Once established, phobias are maintained by consequent determinants. That is, the negative reinforcement the phobic person receives for avoiding the fear-producing situation. Aggressive behaviors can also be dysfunctional when carried to extremes. Aggressive behavior is learned through social observation, direct experiences with positive and negative reinforcements, training or teaching, and strange ideas. People continue to aggress for at least 5 reasons. 1. They enjoy inflicting injury on the victim. 2. They avoid or counter the aversive consequences of aggression by others. 3. They receive injury or harm for not behaving aggressively. 4. They live up to their personal standards of conduct by their aggressive behavior. And 5. They observe others receiving rewards for aggressive acts or punishment for non-aggressive behavior.
In therapy, deviant behaviors according to Bandura began on basis of social cognitive learning principles and are perpetuated because they continue to serve a purpose in certain ways. As a result, therapeutic change is challenging since it entails removing habits that are pleasurable to individuals. For example, smoking, overeating, and consuming alcoholic drinks have mostly pleasant benefits at first, and long-term adverse consequences are usually insufficient to cause avoidance behavior. Self-regulation is the ultimate objective of social cognitive therapy. To do this, the therapist employs techniques intended at inducing particular behavioral changes, generalizing those changes to various contexts, and maintaining those improvements by avoiding relapse. Bandura has suggested treatment approaches which are the following: overt or vicarious modeling, covert or cognitive modeling, and inactive mastery. Overt or vicarious modeling is when people see live or filmed models conduct risky tasks. They often feel less fear and anxiety and are able to perform similar activities themselves. Covert or cognitive modeling is when patients are taught to envision models doing fearful actions by the therapist. However, when overt and covert modeling techniques are coupled with performance, they are most successful. While inactive mastery requires patients to perform those behaviors that already created crippling fears. Sanctioning in any case is not customarily the primary step in treatment. Patients ordinarily start by watching models or by having their enthusiastic excitement reduced through efficient desensitization, which includes the termination of uneasiness or fear through self-induced or therapist-induced unwinding. With systematic desensitization, the specialists work together to put fearsome circumstances on a chain of command from slightest to most undermining. Patients, where relaxed, enact the least threatening behavior and then gradually move through the hierarchy until they can perform the most threatening activity, all that while remaining at a low state of emotional arousal. Bandura demonstrated that every of those techniques can be powerful and that they may be maximum effective while utilized in aggregate with one another. The explanation for their effectiveness can be related to a common mechanism inherent in each of these treatments, namely cognitive mediation. When human beings use cognition to enhance self-efficacy, that is, after they turn out to be convinced that they are able to carry out hard tasks, then, in fact, they grow to be capable in dealing with previously intimidating situations. According to Bandura, humans have the ability to become a variety of things, the majority of which are learned through modeling. Human learning would be extremely slow, laborious, and dangerous if it relied solely on direct trial and error learning. He said that humans have evolved an advanced cognitive capacity for observational learning that enables them to shape and structure their lives through their power of modeling. In his concept of humanity, he is rather optimistic than pessimistic. He emphasized social factors over biology, free choice over determinism, an equal emphasis on teleology and causality, conscious over unconscious, and favored uniqueness over similarity. He is more optimistic than pessimistic because he believes that people can implement new habits at any point in their lives. Dysfunctional behaviors, on the other hand, may persist due to a lack of self-efficacy or because they are thought to be encouraged. These unhealthy patterns, however, do not have to continue because most people can change by mimicking others' productive behaviors and using their cognitive talents to solve issues. Obviously, Bandura places a greater emphasis on social factors rather than biological ones. It does acknowledge, however, that genetics has a contribution in person variable in triadic reciprocal causation paradigm. Even under this approach, intellect usually takes precedence and biological factors become less significant. Furthermore, social factors are definitely more important than the other two variables, such as environment and behavior. In Bandura's view on freedom and determinism, he emphasized freedom since he believes that people have lot of influence over their life. People may control the external variables that will impact their future behavior to some level, and they can choose to ignore or augment earlier experiences. Human agency argues that persons with high personal and collective efficacy, as well as those who employ proxies well, have a lot of control over their actions. Some people, on the other hand, have more freedom than others because they are better at controlling their own conduct. Bandura's perspective on causality and teleology might be classified as moderate. Environmental factors interplay with behavior and personality traits, particularly cognitive activity, to produce human functioning. People are moving with a purpose towards goals they have established for themselves, yet motivation does not exist in the past or the future. It is current. People's perceptions of the future can do affect present behavior, despite the fact that the future events cannot inspire them. In social cognitive theory, conscious thought takes precedence over unconscious factors that influence conduct. Self-control of behaviors is based on self-monitoring, judgment, and self-reaction, all of which are normally conscious during a learning setting. Learnings, particularly motor learnings, may become unconscious after they have become well developed. While strolling, eating, or driving a car, individuals are not need to be fully aware of their actions. Individual variances exist among people due to their extraordinary adaptability and aptitude for learning. Bandura's emphasis on individuality, on the other hand, is tempered by biological and social factors, which both lead to some similarities among people.